welcome to another episode of Management Through Crisis, where we explore the personal and social impact of the recent coronavirus outbreak. My name is Dr. Gerard J. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Behavioural Sciences, Education and Languages at HELP University. And today I'm joined by one of my colleagues at the Department of Psychology, Mr. Sandy Clarke, who is a psychotherapist as well as a journalist. And Sandy, maybe you can just give us a quick introduction about yourself, some background to your work and why your interest in social media.
Yeah, sure. So just briefly, I started off as a journalist back in Scotland in the UK and politics as well. And I worked in that industry for about 10 years or so. So over that time, media and technology has evolved quite some way in the last 10 years. And so I think it's really an interesting time for people who work in media to look at social media and how it's impacting conversation and sort of influencing the way we see things at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And therefore now with your interest in psychology over the last few years, it seems like a very nice marriage, isn't it? And the ideal person to talk about this topic about responsible social media use during a time of high stress and anxiety for a lot of people. Yeah. So let me maybe start off with the first question on the impact of social media in our everyday lives. How do you see this impact in terms of how we process information just using social media?
I think one of the ways that social media has revolutionized the way that we receive information is that we receive information almost instantaneously, and everyone has a platform. In the so-called olden days, when you had main news channels and newspapers, you had to wait for the news to come out the next day or that evening if it was on TV. And a lot of the information was, of course, verified and accurate and up to date. Whereas through social media these days, a lot of information, whether it's true or not, can be shared very quickly. And I think in terms of psychological impact, a lot of people buy into information that may sound plausible, but can actually be very harmful. And it can spread very quickly, this so-called fake news or false information. So in times of crisis, we really need to be careful about the information that we do share, because it can have an impact on how we behave, and obviously that can affect others as well.
Do you have any thoughts about exactly how irresponsible social media use or spreading false fake news during a time of crisis, how does that in any way impact on us? I mean, every day we are confronted with fake news all the time. In fact, that's a word that was coined maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, and then now everyone uses it as if it's just another phrase in our vocabulary. Why is it even more important now that we talk about this?
Well, I think an important point to keep in mind is, especially in times of crisis, when people are afraid of what they can't see, something that's unexpected, they become really hungry for information. They want to know what can protect themselves and their families. So in this kind of environment, fear tends to travel faster than fact. And the knock-on effect of that is that we need to remember that people are mostly unaware of what it means to for information to be accurate or reliable. So most people are not trained journalists or psychologists, and even we mess up sometimes. It's part of being human. We have a tendency to want to find information that's comforting, that helps us give a sense of control to our situation. So we've seen a lot of myths, for example, being spread about this coronavirus, such as drinking warm water to flush the virus into our stomachs, holding breaths for 10 seconds to check for infection, whether we have the virus, even really dangerous information such as gargling bleach or chlorine solutions to protect from the virus. So all of this stuff, although it's false information, to the general public, it can seem plausible enough that it could work. And at the forefront of people's minds is the question, how do I keep myself and my loved ones safe? So we have this kind of good intention to share any kind of information that might sound plausible enough to offer that safety, but often it has the reverse effect.
Yeah. So what I've gathered from you so far is the importance of social media today, simply because of the pace of which news is disseminated. It is more in real time rather than in the past when it was 24 hours lag before the next day's news comes up, and the danger because of the pace of information. There's very little time to verify, isn't it, the information, the accuracy of that information that is sent to us. And if it is not properly verified, it can do a lot of damage because of the false information. It just heightens the sense of anxiety. Yeah. So what constitutes responsible social media use?
So I think there's three key points to keep in mind when sharing information responsibly via social media or any online platform. So the first thing is to share up-to-date and accurate information from reliable news and health sources. It's really important. It's really important because information and knowledge about this coronavirus is constantly evolving as researchers and health institutions learn more about it. The information is being updated on a weekly basis, for example. So it's really important that we share up-to-date information as best we can. Second point I would make is to be aware of who we're sending the information to and why. One of the problems with social media, although it does a lot of good, it also creates the problem whereby we are not aware of the audience that we're sending it out to. So, in the past, you may have told some information to friends or your family, and it goes no further than 5 or 6 people, perhaps, through conversation, through the old school telephone call. But now you're reaching audiences of potentially hundreds and thousands of people, and then they spread that on to other people. So we need to be more aware, mindful of who we're sharing this information with and why. What's the purpose of you're sharing this information? Is it helpful? Is it beneficial? And if you keep in mind the first point that I mentioned, is this up to date? Is it coming from a reliable source? Then that should help you establish, why you're sharing this information. And then the third point I would make as well is to be mindful of our intentions and also the consequences of it, information that we are sharing. And I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine who shared a video with me, and he said, can you check this to make sure it's true, it's accurate? So I looked through the video, and it's this dramatic, terrifying message about people dying and people having severe health consequences. And the message behind the video was that we should stay home and we should stay safe. And it's all good stuff to this point. But then my friend had said, I sent this on to my grandmother. And I thought, okay, that's good intentions. However, you have to be mindful of especially the older generation, the elderly relatives that we have. Do they really want to be receiving, in times of heightened stress and worry and concern, do they really need to be receiving messages that are warning about these grave consequences if you don't keep yourself safe? So I think we also need to make sure that the information we're sharing is relatively positive, reassuring as well. We don't really need any more information or exposure to the dramatic and severe effects. We know that is going on at the moment. So it's important that we try to support each other by sharing information that's helpful, but also sort of optimistic that yes, we're going through a struggle at the moment, but we can come through it together. Because when we share the more dramatic stuff, it just heightens people's anxiety, potentially speaking.
Why do you think fake news spreads so quickly? I mean, the term that people coin is infodemic. It's not just a pandemic, but an infodemic. Why do you think there's such a tendency among us to just send information, whether it's true or false. We don't really verify. As you say, it's so important to do that, but we just feel the need, on all the WhatsApp groups that we are in, to be sending it left, right, and center to everyone in our group. Where do you think this comes from?
I think the confusion lies in how we see social media. So a lot of people see their WhatsApp group, their Facebook page, their Instagram feed or Twitter. They view these things as almost like private sharings, right? So if you share information to your WhatsApp group, for example, that's your family and your friends, and you think that that stays there, that it's confined, but it's not, because they share to their friends and so on. So it spreads like a pandemic. One person shares to 10, 10 shares to 10 each, so that becomes 100 and so on. So I think it's that being unaware that we're not just sharing to our private group. By the time that grows and grows, you'll maybe reach 1,000 people, 10,000, 100,000 people by the end of the day or the week. So I think that, again, it stems from good intention. We have good intentions to share information that we think is helpful. But the trouble is, when we share information that sounds just plausible enough, it can spread very quickly, and it can encourage sort of unhelpful behavior. So the reason why it spreads so fast is because we're unaware. We're not sharing within our private network. Although, I mean, technically we are sharing just to our friends, but we need to keep in mind as well that they also share to friends, and their friends also share to friends. So we each have a responsibility to make sure that we're double checking the information that we're sharing. So, in the knowledge that when we share it on to someone else, then they're going to share it on to 10 other people, and those 10 other people are going to share it on to 50 other people, and so on.
So very apt, isn't it? The whole idea of spreading a virus. That's why the infodemic, that term was coined. It's just like this COVID-19 virus. It is exactly how we spread it. Yeah, good news and bad news alike.
Yeah, and I think sorry, just to jump in on that point, I think it is an important point to be aware that fake news does travel faster than the virus itself. It takes the virus time to spread from person to person, and it's quick enough. So you can imagine, how quickly fake news can spread. And at the best of times, when fake news is shared, the worst that can happen is that you're misinformed about a particular situation. In terms of a health crisis, the worst thing that can happen there is that someone can misconstrue information as being true, and then they take less precautions, or they do something that's not going to be very helpful to relatives or friends or people outside. So sharing fake news during a health crisis has actual implications in terms of people's health and safety. So that's why it's really important that during these kind of times, we are extra careful about what we are sharing.
I mean, and this last question will probably draw on your experience as a journalist, when writing up a story, you always try to corroborate your sources, isn't it? It's so important that you know who your sources are. But in this day and age, as you said, because things happen so fast, and the expectation of churning out news at such a fast pace is always there. The pressure to come up with the news is even greater than when in the old days, 20 years ago. So how does one know which source of news is reliable and which is not? How do you actually corroborate? How do you verify, validate that information is accurate? How do you determine fake news and what is not fake?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's one that's becoming more sophisticated in terms of the difficulty it's becoming to distinguish between fake news and reliable news. One good tip that you can keep in mind is that if you receive any information, whether it be by text or by video, and a lot of these will start off by saying things like, this comes from Stanford University researchers, or Oxford researchers, or Japanese doctors. So it sounds impressive, it sounds authoritative, it sounds reassuring. But one of the ways to make sure that the news or the information is actually reliable is to ask yourself, does this come with an actual citation back to the source? So that means if someone is saying this is coming from Oxford University, is there a link or is there a sort of, you know, a pointer in the direction towards maybe the Oxford website or a reliable news website that verifies the information? If it simply just mentions these impressive sounding institutions, then chances are what the fake news is trying to do is buy your confidence by mentioning these authoritative sources, but unless you can trace the information back directly to that source, then the information is likely to be false. So just to keep that in mind, just because it sounds impressive doesn't mean it's true. I can say something like Oxford researchers have suggested that mindfulness cures the caffeine effects of drinking 10 cups of coffee within the space of an hour. Now that's ridiculous, but because I've said it comes from Oxford researchers, some people might believe that. So that's why it's important, okay, can I trace this information back to the researchers themselves? If I can't, then don't share that information on, because it's liable to be false.
So just checking the links, making sure that people who send those links to you, send that news to you, actually are able to point to the primary source of that information. Otherwise, then resist the urge of you know, just clicking on your send button to everyone in your Facebook account or in your WhatsApp account, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Sandy. You know, for spending this time with us. Certainly, you know, very insightful thoughts and ideas. Something that all of us really have to bear in mind in this day and age, where information is so accessible. We just have to make sure that we don't do more harm by sending out information that can cause that extra bit of harm, because different people have different ways of coping with anxiety, and we just need to be very mindful that even with the best of intentions, they say the road to perdition, the road to hell is paved with the best of intentions, and we could actually do more harm if we are not mindful of checking and corroborating and going back to the primary sources before we share news to other people. So thank you so much again for this time. And that's all from us for now, from the episode of Management Through Crisis. Do keep an eye on more episodes from the Department of Psychology at HELP University and Leaderonomics across our social media. Until then, stay safe, take care. Thank you again, Sandy, and keep well. Bye.